Thank you so much, Minister, and I hear that call to work together. So I run an organisation called Original Power. Our main focus is building the capacity of our communities to really self-determine what happens on our country. But in particular, we've been doing that in the context of climate change, where many of our communities are on the front line still of new fossil fuel projects, but also experiencing extreme heat, as well as some of our communities in the islands in the north who are actually being forced off country as a result of climate change. So that's the context in which we're working with people. But what I wanted to talk about is some of the work we've been doing, the demonstration projects, some of the work around energy security, but also some of the work we're doing to make sure that our communities can benefit at that larger scale around renewables. So I do have some slides. We're going to see how we go with them. Our friends have managed to make them work. I don't know whether I need to nod to do slides. Yes, I do. Yes? Okay, great. If we go to the next one. Excellent. One of the things I sort of wanted to... Yes, okay, I'll come to this. So we know that renewable energy is happening at a pretty rapid pace. And in Australia, we have, native title rights over around, the native title estate is more than 50%. So it's really critical that our communities are on board with the renewable energy transition. We hold the consent rights over vast areas of land in Australia, so it's really important that we are part of this, that we have a seat at the table. And our experience tells us that so far we really haven't been. Our communities aren't aware of the potential, we aren't aware of some of the projects. We're often hearing about the large-scale projects in the paper. We know that there's a better process. So just to give you a sense, this is what it looks like, native title and then, renewable energy zones. There's a lot of work for us to do to make sure that we can line those things up. I guess the other thing I would say is that we're coming at this from, 30 years of experience of the extractive industry, and I'm sure I'm not telling people anything new. When we saw the destruction of the Juukan Gorge caves in Australia, the whole country mourned that loss, and we don't want to see that repeated again. So we are asking the industry to work with us at this early stage. We're getting ourselves organised to make sure that we can actually do this work together. Next one. It's like a bit of a mystery. I'm not quite sure exactly what's coming next. But so this is really just to acknowledge that we are working in conditions and working with communities that are already being moved out of their homelands and out of their outstations. For those from the Territory, the number of days over 35 is increasing. So it's becoming increasingly untenable for people to stay on their homelands unless we do something really dramatic about the way our houses are built, but also the way that our houses are powered. We actually did a piece of work with ANU around energy security and the costs of diesel, the costs of power cards, and of the households we surveyed, 91% of them experienced a disconnection from electricity over a 12-month period. And 3/4 of those households were disconnected 10 times. So just to give you a comparison, for those of you who are part of the national energy market, it's less than 1% of customers that are involuntarily disconnected. So we're talking about some pretty extreme conditions that people are living in. We hear stories from people where they choose to cool one room and take it in turns to sleep in that room. Medicines go off, food goes off. So there's a whole range of issues and health impacts for people living in conditions that we know we could solve pretty easily with some, technological input. So so we've done a couple of trial projects, and partly we're doing this to show that it's possible. What's become very clear to us that it's not necessarily a technical barrier or even necessarily a financial one. Often the barriers are really around policy, so we're keen to work hand in hand with government. And in the Territory, we have been doing this piece of work with the Northern Territory Government and one of the retailers. So in publicly owned houses, of which there's 10,000, we haven't been able to put solar on the roofs because there's issues around what happens to the asset, etc. I'll spare you all the detail. But it means that some of our communities are living without power, and actually it's a really easy fix. So we've done a trial that then we're going to, hopefully do for the rest of the 10,000 houses. But we also know there's 100,000 other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living in similar kinds of conditions that could be pretty easily fixed with solar and batteries. So this was just the example that we did in Tennant Creek. It was because it was too expensive, you needed permission to install it. You also needed to have some arrangement about who was going to remove it, and then there was no arrangement around tariffs. So that's the piece of work we've been doing in Tennant Creek. So we've been doing a couple of other demonstration projects, one of them in Marlinger, which is a small community near Elliot, for those who know that part of the world, halfway between Alice Springs and Darwin. And we did it just to show what it would look like to do solar. So we just did a community centre. And actually, I might go to the video if that's easy. Rather than me telling the story, I'll let them tell it. The solar disco really was the highlight of that whole project, I must say. But one of the things we employed local people. Just obviously it's a very tiny build, but it was to show what it would look like if we do it at the next layer up. And we're also working with a community, so that's going to be 16 to 18 houses, but we're then working with a community that's 7 hours drive away that has 1,300 people living there. And I think I heard this yesterday around the kind of need to build a workforce, skill up a local kind of workforce. And if we're going to do some of the large-scale projects, and there might be some folks who are working on Sun Cable and the 5B crew here, which is going to be a really big infrastructure build, if we can have a local Aboriginal workforce that doesn't have to drive 15 hours or be flown in, that's part of, I think that's a really, critical part of kind of doing this work at scale. So while this might seem small, the idea is then we build a sort of local Aboriginal workforce that can work across multiple projects. So I might just shift gears because I want to make sure that we've got some time for people to have a bit of a chat at your tables, because we've got some questions for you, is that we have... I'll go to the next slide. So in all of our work over the last couple of years in doing these demonstration projects, it became very clear to us that actually we can't just be doing this as one organisation, in a couple of different parts of the country. We spoke with the Indigenous Clean Energy group from Canada. I don't know if people are familiar with their work. They've been around 10 years, so they've got a head start on us. They've got around 300, Aboriginal-owned projects. At the moment in Australia, we don't have any that are, that we are the proponents of. So we are really not there yet. We heard that they're generating $1.5 billion in Indigenous procurement. And the thing that they told us that they did was they worked hand in hand, industry and government together. They got government to incentivise projects that prioritised working with First Nations communities. They put the projects where First Nations communities have said we want them, which we're also not yet doing in Australia. I think we could do well to do some mapping of where our communities are organised, where our native title rights are strong, where obviously the potential works, and we actually put the projects there rather than it being the other way around. I think that would certainly help developers because the certainty is there. Our communities are actually asking for those projects. So they gave us a whole lot of advice about some of that work. And so what we've done is set up the First Nations Clean Energy Network. We launched it in November last year. And really the whole point of this is to make sure that our communities can equitably benefit and participate in the clean energy revolution. So, this is good. I'll talk you through this. No, so we've done it we've got 3 pillars. One of them is focusing on community, which is energy security, which we've just talked a little bit about. But the other part is also getting our traditional owners kind of project ready, if you like, but also supporting our communities to negotiate with the renewable energy industry differently than we have in the past. And, we've got a lot of legacy that we're bringing to this work as well, which means that, we don't want to see the kind of divide and conquer mentality that some of the companies have done in the past. We want to see that we can actually have a list of potential benefits, that it's local jobs, that it's on our terms, we're part of the design, that sort of thing. So we're working with communities to do that kind of energy security, but also that negotiation piece. The second sort of, they're all one because they're all equally important. The second pillar is around policy reform, because we actually think that there should be a national framework that we can then hook into. Because what we're seeing is, we're not experts in this industry, but the regulation, and I'm sure there are others who would speak to this much better than I will, but is a little all over the place. So there's, each state and territory has its own arrangements. This is also the case with some of our native title rights. So we're keen to see some national policy reform that we can connect into and actually ensures that we can benefit. And then obviously the third one is we want to work with industry. We want to reset the way that we do business with this industry. And we actually think we have a window where people are really interested in that. And so we're keen to do it before we get to the point where we find ourselves, having cultural heritage issues, having debates with companies about where they're putting projects, that we're actually kind of on the front foot saying, let's do this piece of work together. So I might leave it there, show you the little video, which is really just you should join the network and support this work, and then we might do some discussion.